Host the ultimate backyard barbecue with Whole Foods Market. It's the hot grill summer event through July 16th with sizzling sales on no antibiotics ever boneless beef ribeye steak and beef New York strip steak. Plus, check out sales on sustainable wild-caught Alaska sockeye salmon, organic strawberries, and more. In a hurry? Choose grab-and-go favorites like picnic salads and sushi, plus plenty of cooler-friendly beverages. Make it a hot grill summer at Whole Foods Market.
The following podcast includes explicit language, not restricted to words beginning with F, S, B, and Q. Hi, I'm Stefan Fatsis, and this is Hang Up and Listen for the week of June 17th, 2024. On this week's show, Slate contributor Alex Kirshner will drop by to talk about Bryson DeChambeau winning, or is it Rory McIlroy losing the U.S. Open of golf? Then we'll be joined by Washington Post sports columnist Jerry Brewer, who will break down the NBA Finals and also discuss his recent four-part series, Grievance Games, which explores how the promise of sports as a national unifier has buckled under the pressures of grievance and division. I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm the author of the books Word Freak, A Few Seconds of Panic, and Wild and Outside. Also in Washington, it's Josh Levin, the author of The Queen and the host of an upcoming slow burn series for Slate on the rise of Fox News. He's making a one-segment cameo this week to talk about the golf. Big golf guy. What's your favorite golf club, Josh? The Niblick or the Mashie?
Thanks for having me, Stefan. Great to be here. I don't need to answer that question. No
Moving
comment.
along then.
Wow. Joe Mazzulla, Jerry.
Yeah, spacing. It's all about the spacing. And, I'm not going to, the most important thing is my Jewishness. Am I doing this right?
Yeah. Joel Anderson, Palo Alto, California. He's the host of Slow Burns seasons 3, 6, and 8, the last of which is the award-winning Becoming Justice Thomas. He also writes Emotional Investment, a Slate column about money and how it makes us feel. And he's going to skip the golf segment. Hey, Joel.
Yeah, I don't have a favorite golf club, so it helps. Would one a 9-iron? Is that one of them?
That is one of them. Yeah, I think I'm the only person on the show who actually played golf regularly at one time in his life. I must have mentioned before on the show that I was suspended from my high school golf team for one match because a kid on another team ratted me out for throwing a club. Have I mentioned that before?
Wow.
Yeah. I know.
Unsportsmanlike.
Hothead.
Yeah.
Yeah. The kid was a dick, though. I mean
what a snitch. What a snitch. That's
totally.
Something. Come on.
All right, now, as always, we want to thank our Slate Plus members for making the show possible. And in this week's bonus episode, we'll talk with Joel about his recent and hugely entertaining reporting for Pablo Torre's podcast, Pablo Torre Finds Out, about the tatterdemalion Oakland Athletics and their parsimonious, reviled owner, John Fisher. You can hear that episode right now, as long as you're a Slate Plus member. If you don't subscribe, there are two ways for you to hear it. You can either subscribe right now by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or you can visit slate.com/hangup+ to get access wherever you listen.
On Sunday in Pinehurst, North Carolina, Rory McIlroy had a 3-foot 9-inch putt on the 72nd hole of the U.S. Open to finish at 6 under par. And let's listen. Those are not happy groans, if there is such a thing. Rory's putt lipped out. The second putt of less than 4 feet that he gacked on in the last 3 holes. And after Bryson DeChambeau's save out of the bunker on his 72nd hole, Rory's 10-year major drought kept on droughting. Bryson 6 under, Rory 5 under. Joining us now is Slate contributing writer and one of the hosts of the college football podcast Split Zone Duo, Alex Kirshner. Hey, Alex.
Josh, Stefan, hello. Wonderful to be with you, as always.
Thank you for not peeling out in your car from the parking lot of this Zoom. But after that crushing sequence I just described, Rory McIlroy did just that, leaving Pinehurst without talking to reporters. Unfortunately, Alex, that means it's up to you to answer questions on his behalf. What happened out there?
The mental game. Golf's a mental game. Rory has the physical game. He's always had the physical game. It is impossible to conclude that anything other than a lapse in the mental game befell him in the last 4 holes of this tournament. And that's why Bryson DeChambeau is the U.S. Open champion, and Rory McIlroy is sadder today than he's probably ever been in his golf career.
He didn't just miss those 2 putts, Alex. He bogeyed 3 of the last 4 holes. He had a 2-stroke lead coming down the back 9 at one point. He has now not won a major despite finishing in the top 10, 135 times in the last decade. This is almost inexplicable, mental or not mental. I mean, he is clearly one of the best golfers of his generation. And to see this happen over and over, and this was the worst of all, is pretty gutting as a fan of sport.
Yeah, I think if you want the redemption story and you want the great player to end the drought, this is as bad as it gets. And this was a loss that really stood apart from any other Sunday major disappointment that Rory has had in the last 10 years, and there have been a lot of them, because this was not a case really of Rory getting beaten as much as it was Rory just blowing it. And that's with full credit to Bryson DeChambeau, who was a championship caliber player in this tournament and will not have anything like an asterisk next to his name. That's not what I'm saying. But Rory has 2 putts from inside 4 feet that he literally never misses statistically, and he misses both of them. Rory has plenty of opportunities to make, even before those putts, to make smarter golf shots that would have put him in a position where it wouldn't have mattered. You know, he, on the 205-ish yard 17th hole, was playing 220 yards on Sunday, just missed the green, just took a little bit too much club, and on this long par 3 just bounced one that sailed over the green and never left himself a chance to have a stress-free par. On the 18th hole, which is not a particularly long hole, it's about 450 yards, Rory McIlroy pulled out the driver, the big dog, to let it hunt, even though he is so long off the tee that there was no ostensible benefit to him doing so. He could have very easily hit 3-wood or even a low iron and put the ball much more likely in the fairway instead of in the what they call the native area that kind of flanks the hole on the sides. So he just made unusual mental errors in addition to the putting yips or whatever afflicted him on those couple of greens at the end of the round. And that was different than what usually happens. What's typically happened on Sunday with Rory at the majors is he's played pretty well, and somebody else has just made more putts. And that was the case with Cameron Smith at the British Open in 2022. It was the case with Wyndham Clark when he beat Rory by a shot to win the U.S. Open in Los Angeles last year. And it's been so often the case. But in this event, it was actually Rory who made the long putts. He made like 3 of them from more than 20 feet on Sunday. DeChambeau didn't make one. He didn't make a single bomb putt throughout the round. And yet Rory basically coughed it up with questionable decision-making off the tee and these biffed gimme putts on the back 9.
Just a note for our listeners, we are not piping in bird sounds. Those are actually live birds at Alex's Airbnb, adding to the golfy ambiance of this segment. I think the numbers was 496 out of 496 on putts less than 3 feet, because he missed one that was in the 2-foot range at 16 on the season for Rory. It's hard to think of anything in my life that I've done correctly 496 times in a row. I think I probably even missed the toothbrush with my toothpaste one day out of 496 times. And so, yeah, it's inexplicable. It's a reason why golf is such a compelling drama on these Sundays of major events. And I saw a lot of people saying it was the most dramatic ending to a round of a major championship than they can remember. But the play on both sides was actually so poor, I felt that it was missing some of the requisite drama that I look for, Alex. I mean, you did get the great save by Bryson on 18, which was required because of his poor play leading up to the final bunker shot. So I don't know if you have a personal formula of chokery and artistry and where this kind of fell, given, the balance of those two that we look for in a golf tournament?
I think it was a little bit of both. I mean, Bryson certainly didn't go out and grab the tournament. I mean, there were 5 holes left in this event, and he was 2 shots back, and he played those holes in 1 over par and still won. And so I think you look at that, and from that perspective, it's pretty clear that it was Rory giving it away. But I think you also have to give this to Bryson, that he put on an all-time masterclass in golf scrambling here, scrambling when you miss the fairway and you find your way to get the ball in the hole for par anyway. I mean, he only hit 6 fairways in this round, which was, I think there was one player in the entire field who hit fewer fairways in the 4th round of this tournament than Bryson did.
And there must have been some luck involved then too, Alex, because it wasn't all like skill. If you put the ball in the wrong spot, then you're going to be screwed no matter, how good you are at scrambling.
It was almost becoming a joke at some point. I mean, Bryson kept hitting the ball into the native area off to the sides of the fairways, and the lie almost every time, with 1 or 2 exceptions, was incredibly forgiving. And he was able to get a pretty good bit of club on the ball and send it flying towards the green, and he was able to use that to his advantage to make these pars. On the 18th hole, though, and I think this is where the credit is really due, that wasn't the case. I mean, Bryson did not have a line to the green from where he hit that ball. I mean, he was basically buried in the corner of a hole, sort of behind a grandstand that was set up for the fans. He tried to get a free drop, free relief from a USGA rules official, didn't get it, and really had no choice but to punch the ball out into a bunker or into the fairway in front of the green. He did that, and then he hit what he described afterward as like a 5 in 100 bunker shot. I mean, it was the shot of the tournament, no doubt. I mean, when he needs to, in order to avoid a playoff with Rory McIlroy, he has to put the ball out of the sand and put it within a couple of feet to make a putt. And from about 55 yards away, he hits it to about 4 feet. And it was a really brilliant splash out of him. Just one of the great short game shots, I think, in the history of golf. There's no other way to look at it, with considering everything that was on the line. And it was just executed perfectly. So in that instance, if you want to just take the lens of the 18th hole, I mean, Bryson went out and won it, and he especially did so when you contrast that to what Rory did on the 18th green, with missing a putt of about 3 feet and 9 inches.
We can say that not great golf by anybody, but that's the U.S. Open. I mean, this course was designed to make golfers suffer, to make the best golfers in the world suffer. Before the tournament, you saw people on the green sort of rolling balls off of them and watching them skitter away 100 feet. Players had to hit to little mounds in order to be able to sink a reasonable putt. Fairways are narrow. The native area is tough. So yeah, he definitely benefited from those forgiving lies. But this is a tournament that players routinely complain is too hard. The winning score is always, modest to say the least, 6 under par. So isn't what we saw just sort of what the U.S. Open produces?
It is. I think it was a very well executed golf course setup, championship design. And, Rory himself talked about this during the course of the tournament, though not after, because he skittled away pretty quickly before anyone could ask him questions. But this is a golf course that is designed, I think, to reward amazing shots, to leave merely good shots on the borderline. And this is where it's fun, to allow bad shots to be compensated for if you do something amazing and get a little bit lucky. I think it puts the shots in those 3 buckets. It doesn't necessarily ruin you with a bad shot, but it can. And even if you had a good shot, and I think the perfect example of this was Rory's second shot on the nearly 600-yard par 5 5th hole in this tournament. He hits like a 300-yard shot from the fairway towards the green. He's kind of drawing it towards the green, a right-handed hitter bringing the ball back towards himself on a hole that's kind of off to his left. And he rolls the ball up 15 or 20 yards onto the screen. And it's a great shot, but it's a good shot, but it's not quite enough. And it doesn't quite get to where the green would hold it. So it rolls off 30 or 40 yards into one of these native areas, and he makes bogey. And that's the difference. It's on that razor's edge. And I think if Rory hits that ball 4 yards harder up towards the green, he makes birdie there and he wins. But he doesn't, and that's the difference between a good shot and a great shot. And it is the kind of luck that is required to win a U.S. Open. And, I'm not sure what he would have said in the immediate aftermath of the loss, but I think that Rory as someone who prides himself on appreciating the subtleties of a golf course, would acknowledge that that's just part of the deal when you play these tournaments.
You're not going to get tased if you just say rough instead of native area, Alex. It's okay.
It's a good point. It's a good point. But here's the thing.
This isn't the Masters. This isn't the Masters.
But there is a difference, Josh. As the golf course architecture people would tell you, that the rough, you just hit it in and you're in thick grass. But if you're in this native area where just the ground does what it does and what the land in North Carolina gives you, then you might wind up just kind of on a piece of dirt where you have an ability to hit the ball. And
there you go.
Bryson got that time and time again.
From a narrative perspective, as golf is kind of on its perpetual quest for stars that make people want to follow the sport, and also in this moment where Bryson DeChambeau of Crushers GC of Live Golf is part of this rift that's been tearing the game apart. I mean, I think this couldn't have gone any better. We're obviously not in Red Sox territory, although it does seem like it's been 86 years since Rory won a major, but kind of extending his drought and in this dramatic fashion, already a guy that fans really love and root for in Rory, and also Bryson in his like comeback from, being the sport's biggest heel for reasons I don't particularly understand. Everyone seems to like him now. Maybe you can explain that, Alex. But, this is, Bryson becoming more of a star, becoming more of a, maybe inexplicably, a man of the people. And the quest for Rory to break this drought has now gotten into kind of operatic territory. Like, these are two reasons to continue, watching the sport and watching the majors.
Yeah, I think that it was a personally compelling couple of players who were duking it out for this thing. You're right about Bryson's transformation. I think it's hard to know exactly why it's happened, and I don't think there's just one reason why. There were people 3-4 years ago especially who really didn't like this guy. In some respects, he was just a bullying victim. He was in a pretty one-sided feud with Brooks Koepka, the 5-time major winner, who is now also on Live Golf with him. Essentially, Koepka encouraged fans at events to razz DeChambeau in a way that sort of escalated into bullying that DeChambeau really did not handle well. He responded to it terribly. He had the tour allegedly throwing people out of events when they would hector him. Other people didn't like him because he was too slow a player, or he was too nerdy with his extremely scientific approach to golf. There were some rules issues. There were issues where he would blame his equipment, and even his reps at his equipment company would make fun of, or would call him a baby, as one did. Basically compared him to a child.
He tried to get relief from an anthill because ants are dangerous animals.
Yeah, so he was a complete child on the golf course a lot of the time. I think also for the minority of golf fans who are somewhat liberal, or at least who don't think that, January 6th was good, Bryson is a very loud and proud Trump guy. And I think that for a lot of people, a minority, because it's golf, but I think that's a real thing as well, that has caused some negative feedback, some negative perception of him over the years. And I think a lot of these things, though, have just kind of flipped in the last couple of years. Not the fact I'm sure he's still a huge Trump guy, but as far back as the 2023 Masters, he was talking more about wanting to present a softer edge, how he sort of regretted the way that he'd acted a little bit in the past. He's become a really popular YouTuber. He does Dude Perfect videos, which if you don't know what that is, that's fine. But, he'll do that. He'll make himself accessible. He's on the rope line signing as many autographs as anybody since Phil Mickelson, who was previously the king of doing that. He made up with Brooks Koepka. He was a Ryder Cup contributor for the U.S. and played really well, so that you get a little bit of patriotism. He was getting USA chance at this tournament, which is funny, given that he is currently playing golf on behalf of the Saudi Arabian government, but nonetheless. And he seems to have kind of put a lighter touch on things, and just to make himself more of a friendly face to the people who watch golf, especially in person. And so he's a different guy now. I think that it was pretty clear this week from afar that the people there wanted him to do well. I don't know if they wanted him to do well more than Rory. I think you can only glean so much from how loud people are cheering at a major at one weekend. But he definitely has turned people to his side for a host of reasons in a way that they weren't 2, 3, 4 years ago.
He also doesn't look like a bodybuilder anymore.
That's another thing. Yeah, and he's been pretty upfront about that. I think it's sort of an authenticity point, he's talked about how he basically turned his body into something that wasn't good for him. I mean, you can just Google big Bryson DeChambeau or Bryson DeChambeau muscles. I mean, he looked huge and like shit a couple years ago when he basically transformed his body to be the longest hitter in the world. And he's still the longest hitter in the world, but he has made himself healthier. He's talked about that. And his golf game has become much more well-rounded, by the way, at the same time. I mean, nobody can accuse him of just being a masher like maybe they could a few years ago. I mean, he really does have a well-rounded total golf game.
All right, last question, Alex. The rift between Live Golf and the PGA Tour seems to be easing, and there are reports that there's going to be some sort of agreement. Rory was kind of the face of the PGA. DeChambeau was one of the faces of Live Golf. Bring us up to date on that and whether we're going to see a true détente rapprochement in the sport.
We're all still waiting. It's been more than a year since the commissioner of the PGA Tour and the head of the Saudi Public Investment Fund sat on a CNBC set and talked about how they were going to make this deal and unify the game at the top levels. There has been no deal. That was just a conceptual framework deal. I have no idea if they're ultimately going to reach a deal. It doesn't seem like they're especially close at the moment, but at the same time, they have not retreated to a war of words. Like, they haven't talked about each other in the same harsh tones that they were before that agreement. But at the same time, Liv is still trying to get players to leave the PGA Tour to go to Liv. And they did that most successfully with Jon Rahm, who at the time was the reigning Masters champ before the season. So I don't know if there will ultimately be an agreement of any kind between these two parties. I do know that whether there is or there isn't, the PGA Tour has, by trying to make a deal, forfeited any moral high ground that it might have had when Jay Monahan, the commissioner of the tour, was up there talking about 9/11 families and how you have to apologize for joining this Saudi effort to sort of overtake a big chunk of pro golf. So without that moral high ground, you're in a tougher position if you're the PGA Tour, because if it's just a wallet war, you can guess who might run out of money first: the PGA Tour, even with a big group of new investors that it has, or the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia. I suspect that's not a war that the PGA Tour, on strictly financial terms, would ever win.
Alex Kirshner is a Slate contributing writer and one of the hosts of the college football podcast Split Zone Duo. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, fellas. Always great to be here.
Up next, I'm tapping out, and Jerry Brewer is coming in to talk about his Washington Post series, Grievance Games. Looking for an assist with your credit card, but can't get a hold of anyone? Luckily, with 24/7 US-based live customer service from Discover, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, you heard that right. You can talk to a real human in customer service anytime. Sounds like a real game changer. Make the right call and get the service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. Looking for an assist with your credit card, but can't get a hold of anyone? Luckily, with 24/7 US-based live customer service from Discover, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, you heard that right. You can talk to a real human in customer service anytime. Sounds like a real game changer. Make the right call and get the service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
By the time many of you listen to this segment, either the Boston Celtics will be NBA champions or the Dallas Mavericks will have extended the series to a sixth game. This year's NBA Finals has been a lopsided affair, with the Celtics running out to a historically insurmountable 3-0 lead and the Mavericks fighting back in Game 4 with the third largest victory in Finals history. Safe to say, this won't be one of those championships that people talk about with any reverence when it's all done. So instead of focusing too much on the finals, we're going to move through a few different NBA topics with our guest, the great Jerry Brewer, longtime sports columnist at the Washington Post. Thanks for joining us today, Jerry.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be on the show.
So you're in Boston now, but you were in Dallas for Game 4, which in some ways was a referendum on Luka Doncic's superstar status following a sloppy performance in Game 3. And in fact, Luka was so bad that it inspired this very pointed criticism for ESPN's Brian Windhorst.
His defensive performance is unacceptable. He is a hole on the court. The Celtics are attacking him. They are ahead in this series because they have attacked him defensively. And you've got a situation here where Luka is complaining about the officiating. They have begged him. They have talked with him. They have pleaded with him. He is costing his team because of how he treats the officials. He's a brilliant player. He does so many things well. They are here because of how he did. His performance in this game is unacceptable and the reason why the Mavericks are not going to win. He's got to get over this. And the fact that he came out after the game and blame the officials showed me he's nowhere close yet. So maybe over the summer somebody will get to him because nobody with the Mavericks or anybody else in his life has. And that's where the Mavericks are at this point. They're never going to get to this tunnel with the trophy if he doesn't improve those aspects of his game.
So, Jerry, what did you think of Luka's Game 4 follow-up?
It's exactly the response that you expected from a guy who's one of the 3 or 5 best players in the NBA. And it was interesting to me because Draymond Green just kind of laughed at it all and said, we all know that Luka can't play defense. What's the big deal? Well, honestly, Draymond, like a lot of people don't know the NBA like you do. They don't play every day and they haven't elbowed everyone in the leagues. And this stage, the thing I love about the NBA Finals more than anything, it's not just about the teams. It's about superstars. And the NBA has always been a league that asks the question, how great is your greatness? And sometimes in the finals, your greatness is not good enough. And Luka being maybe the most dynamic offensive hub we've ever seen in basketball, at least in modern basketball, since Magic Johnson, just for himself and for others, that's not good enough in the finals. You can't get blown by 13 times a game in the finals. I watched about 9 minutes of the game in game 3, in between the first quarter, midway through the second quarter, in which he completely lost his mind because he was upset about 2 calls. That just can't happen in a game in which every possession matters. So it's interesting to see Luka in game 4. You knew he was ready when he committed his first foul and he raised his hand. And he almost did that in just this passive aggressive manner to say, hey, I realize it and this is going to be different. And it was different in game 4.
Derek Lively, the Mavs rookie, was quoted after the game saying that he told Luka, on your first 2 fouls, just don't do anything. Just don't do anything, please. Like begging him to change his ways. I mean, Luka at 29, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals in just 3 quarters before the Mavericks sat all their starters in the meaningless fourth quarter. It's hard to know what drives players, whether it's a coach's lecture, a teammate's speech, or a media rant like Windhorst's, but something seemed to click for Luka in that game. I mean, maybe it was just being down 3-0 and having been embarrassed so badly publicly and on the court.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing, right, Stefan, is that it would have been hard to believe that Luka and the Mavericks would have closed out their year going out with a whimper. Like, no matter, like, even if they lose in 5 games, right, or whatever, like, there was no way that was going to be sort of the closing note for the season for Luka, that game 3 performance. Because that's just not who he is. Like, even though he's not a great defender, like, that went beyond not being a great defender. It was just being an inattentive player out there, right? Like, you're missing people on back cuts. They're taking advantage of you on pick and roll. You know what I mean? Like, they were consistently hunting you out. And that doesn't mean that doesn't happen to Luka from time to time, but this was a matter of more of inattention and like a lack of competitiveness as opposed to anything else. And so it wasn't a surprise to see him turn it around. Now, I think the thing, though, that kind of, if I was a Celtics fan, that I would be worried about, and it's the thing I think that makes everybody sort of be like, oh, everybody keeps saying that you're one of the best teams ever. Like, empirically, if you look at the data and everything else, like, this is supposedly one of the best teams in NBA history. But then you look at that game 4 and you're like, man, all the stuff that I didn't like about Boston before, it's still there. Like, I still don't trust the handle of Tatum and Brown. I still don't trust their shot selection down tight. And also just, to be frank, like, that style of ball, Jerry, like shooting as many 3-pointers as you can, because I mean, that is like how the Boston has been a historically great offense this year. They just shoot a lot of threes. That's their offense, right? And sometimes, like, if you can't get easier shots, you're going to have games like that. So I'm not saying that, like, we expect that in Game 5, but some of those same troubling trend lines that you've seen in the Celtics in years before, it seemed like they kind of popped up in Game 4 there.
Yeah, the way I look at the Celtics is I think it's really hard in the modern NBA for your best player or players not to be good to very good, at minimum, playmakers for others. And they don't have a true point guard. They don't have a Giannis who can get 30 and 7 assists. And so I think they've created this system, which is an interesting coaching by Joe Mazzulla, to create some connectivity on that team. But it's very much their system is as simple or as complicated as you want it to be. Because ultimately it's the classic, let's touch the paint in order to get the ball to shooters. And I think sometimes it's like, you know what? Why don't you borrow from some of the old NBA and let's just go straight ISO with these guys. You have Jaylen Brown, who is just tremendously athletic. Obviously, his handle will forever be a weakness.
What? I was going to say, isn't that kind of the problem?
Yes. Yeah, that becomes the problem there. And you also, you forget that Jason Tatum forgets that he's 6'10" about 10 times a game. and the terrible three-point shots that he takes. I wish that he would cut those in half and he'd just be so much stronger. But that is forever going to be a problem with Boston. When they get in that mode in which all they're doing is shooting threes and bricking them, I just compare it to a computer glitching because they have devised this system that you look at them and it's just offensive efficiencies off the charts. But they're not as great of an offensive team as their numbers show, and they're not as great of a team overall as their 80-21 record so far this season, counting the playoff shows.
Let's also move on because, last week, in addition to the finals, of course, we had some, sad news from the NBA is Jerry West. I think everybody sort of knows him as the logo. But he's, before that, he was the great Lakers guard and later one of the best executives in NBA history. And he passed away Wednesday at 86. And, Stefan, I'm not asking you this because you're old. But I am asking you this, I assume you've Jerry West is pretty much
I remember Jerry West.
You remember Jerry West.
The
Okay.
60
I was trying to be nice.
shot in the 1970 NBA Finals against the Knicks. Yeah. That's how old I am.
Yeah, well, see, okay.
I was very small. It's one of my first sports memories, to be fair.
So how do you remember him more as? Because he's actually going to go into the Hall of Fame again as a contributor. This will be like his third induction into the Hall. So, do you think of him as a player? Do you think of him as an executive? Where do you? I think of him as an executive
and as an icon. I mean, I was too young to really appreciate how good Jerry West was when I was a kid. I mean, I was alive in the late '60s, sentient in the late '60s and early '70s. And do remember his greatness. But I was sort of a New York kid focused on the Knicks and excited that they won their title and never really understood how excruciating parts of Jerry West's career really were. Jerry, he's the losses in the NBA Finals, only one championship, the Celtics, just dominating that era. You really grew to, as I grew older and as I'm sure you feel now, you really appreciated what Jerry West went through and the struggles that he went through and the way he talked about his career and his life in that way.
The struggles made him such a great executive. I think it's really poetic for Jerry West that he was 1 for 8 in the finals, lost 8 times in the championship round, and then as an executive contributed to the building of 8 championship teams. It just feels perfectly symmetrical that it turned out that way. One of the great things about Jerry West, even a guy like Jordan, who's so much younger than Jerry West, they've got a disdain, especially when you want to compare today's generation to them. Jerry West was someone who, for 6 decades, really appreciated what the NBA and what the stars of the NBA are now. And I love that the NBA is only 78 years old. Jerry West has been around since 1960. So 64 of those 78 years he touched in some manner, because even when he took little breaks as an executive, the way that he was doing things impacted those teams. He could have many more championships, right? He stepped away from the Lakers in the middle of the Shaq and Kobe era. So some of those titles don't go to him, but they should be directly linked to him. And some of the stuff with the Warriors as well. So, I mean, we're talking about someone that, if you really want to account for it, probably accounted for 14, 15 championships in the NBA. And then we haven't even talked about the different styles of play and the different uses of talent, the different ways that you evaluate players. And it's beyond just what he did as a Laker. You think about taking that Grizzlies franchise. When Jerry West got there, they had a winning percentage of under 23%. 229 was their winning percentage. And he got them their first 51 season, kind of led to some of the success they're having. The Warriors, and you think once he became a consultant, how long they hadn't won a championship, and then they become this dynasty or mini dynasty, however you want to call it. And then the Clippers, like helping them get to the point where the success that they have had since Blake Griffin is truly sustainable. And I used to go back as a nerd and just evaluate like the little moves, the little things that he did. Like, what was his batting average? Like, a lot of GMs can get the stars, but they make a million mistakes. His batting average on little things are about as high as anyone I've seen in sports history.
Yeah, no, man. And I mean, and to your earlier point, Jerry, like it's really interesting to think about it because, I mean, dude, he was drafted not by the Los Angeles Lakers. He was drafted by the Minneapolis Lakers. You know what I mean? And so, like, for a person to have that sort of legacy in the NBA that touches back to, I mean, I don't mean to say it like this, but I'm going to have to say it like this. Like, the league had barely desegregated by the time he showed up, right? And he's like he ushered in a number of different eras, the Wilton Russ era, the Kareem Lakers era, and rebuilt the Lakers around Magic Johnson. And then he was there for when Shaq and Kobe got there. And so, like, that's like, to have that much of an imprint on the league. It would barely be possible for anybody to have that kind of influence over the league anymore, right? Like, I don't know what LeBron is going to do, like, going forward. Like, he says he wants to be an owner, or something like that. But, like, it will barely be possible for anybody to have that kind of impact on the league in that many different capacities like Jerry West did. Cause it's just kind of a one-of-a-kind career, right, Stefan? Like, there's just no, I mean, can you even think, is there even a corollary? I'm trying to think, like, Donnie Nelson maybe sort of fits into that mold because he was a great player and, you know, great coach and, you know, but even then that doesn't really touch it, I think.
No, and I think I want to ask you about this, Jerry, but what Jerry West really did was span the entirety of the NBA's existence. You mentioned the longevity, but look at what the NBA was in 1960. It had 8 teams. There were franchises in Syracuse, Cincinnati, St. Louis. This was a small, unimportant professional sports league. And West, Russell, Robertson, the other great players that emerged in the 1960s and transformed this league, which was still not overwhelmingly white, but was not the league that we know now, into this commercial behemoth. He saw it all.
Jerry West arrives in L.A. and they were driving a bus around with a basket attached to it, doing layup drills and other things, trying to get people in basketball. And you see what it's become. I think it's really significant that Jerry West played a piece of the 70s, which I think in terms of racial tolerance was a really difficult time in the NBA's history. And even though you still had Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, Wilt Chamberlain, Kareem, parity in the NBA like we're seeing right now, it couldn't gain any traction really until Magic Bird. And I think some of the racism around that Jerry West experienced with his teammates, I think that really colored his view on how he was going to be. And so you see this guy from Nowheresville, West Virginia, who's just able to relate to everyone. And I love the quote he has. Everyone talks about being a dog now. He's like, well, I wasn't a dog. I was a wolf. Wolves eat dogs. And we got to really respect time is making us forget what a great player he was. And there's always there's that conversation. Now that he's passed, that conversation will be no more because I think we just have a certain reverence for people and love for them when they die. But that conversation of, oh, we should change the logo. And he never cared about the fact that it's an open secret that his silhouette is the logo. But I think hopefully that conversation is over now, because if you just want to talk about someone who was top of the line, top 20 all-time player even now, and I think he's probably still got another couple decades where he'll still be among the top 25 players in NBA history. And then to go from that to being the greatest executive the NBA has known, and I think the greatest executive sports has ever known.
Wow.
What a remarkable career.
That's a good note to end on, and we're going to bring Jerry back for the next segment where we're going to talk about his great series in the Washington Post, The Grievance Games.
Host the ultimate backyard barbecue with Whole Foods Market. It's the hot grill summer event through July 16th with sizzling sales on no antibiotics ever boneless beef ribeye steak and beef New York strip steak. Plus, check out sales on sustainable wild-caught Alaska sockeye salmon, organic strawberries, and more. In a hurry? Choose grab-and-go favorites like picnic salads and sushi, plus plenty of cooler-friendly beverages. Make it a hot grill summer at Whole Foods Market.
Start your summer road trip at Midas and get up to $30 off your next repair service. Plus, get a free closer look vehicle check to make sure you're road trip ready. If you need brake service, an alignment check, or tune-up, hit up Midas for up to $30 off. For more details, request your appointment at Midas.com.
In 2016, Colin Kaepernick took a knee during the national anthem to protest police brutality and social injustice against Black Americans. A year later, at a political rally in Huntsville, Alabama, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, responded to Kaepernick and the movement he spawned. Wouldn't you love, Trump said, to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now. Out. He's fired. He's fired. With one vulgar and meandering diatribe against protesting NFL players, Jerry Brewer writes in his new Washington Post series, Grievance Games, Trump made American sports civility collapse. It seems no one cares to rebuild it. Jerry, the series is a sobering, saddening, and maddening exploration of how sports have been co-opted and politicized, usually by disingenuous actors on the right, like Trump, to score culture war points and radicalize supporters. Before we dive into some of the specifics that you report on in the series, I wanted to ask, how did you settle on the idea of grievance as the driving force in modern sports talk, and why did you come to believe that that Trump moment was so important?
This is something I've been thinking about 3 years and really trying to get at it. And really it was, if we come off of 2020 and then Biden winning the election and you go post-Capitol riots, all the talk of politics and sports from the athlete side just stopped. They were focusing on recovery for their leagues and for the finances of their leagues. And really, no one has made a particularly strong stance the last 3 years. But the conversation of sports and politics continue. And I kept wondering, exactly what is it and why is everything so bizarre, right? Like, why is Aaron Rodgers' voice on everything so resonant? And I just kept coming back to the fact that all we ever think about when we think about the conversation of sports and society is dissident athletes. And we hadn't thought about the forces that try to maintain certain systems or have a regression of progress that so many in the sports world stand for. And I just started keeping an account of this, almost like a checklist. This is the issue. This is what happened. I hate our binary political system, but it's like, okay, this is a force that's coming from the left. This is a force that's coming from the right. And really, it was about a year ago that I was like, I want to write this. I know I want to call this the Grievance Games. And then there was just like a million different factors to go through. And it was, well, how do you focus this? And how do you present a series that doesn't have a news story driving it, that is opinion journalism based, but still going to have strong reporting. How do we attack this? How do we frame this? And, it took about 3.5 months for the 4 stories that have been presented so far. And I think there's going to be a second wave that is just about handling division for later in the year. That's more experience based, but I really wanted to dive into the concept and the complexity and how below the surface it is, but how in your face it is. And that's just how I came up with it. But I've known since this time a year ago that I wanted to write a series of essays, still in opinion form, but reported, that was called the Grievance Games.
So, you come up with the idea for it, right? And you know that you want to write this series of essays, but then you got to decide which stories best illustrate my point, right? And so you settled on, the Jackie Robinson piece, the Sadie Shriner piece, talking about the media, but what does your list of notes look like? Like, what were the ones that didn't make it? How did you whittle it down to those and say, okay, these are the ones that are most illustrative of the point that I would like to make about division via sports?
Yeah, there wound up being like about 12 things that I wanted to consider. It's like, well, which ones do I have the mental capacity to access at this point in time, right? While covering a sports news cycle that never ends, because there's always something going on and it's normally high stakes. And there's some stuff with the wealth gap and how athletes are perceived versus how they most of them never really leave the communities, the ones who've had rags to riches stories. That was one that I wanted to get at, but I couldn't at this point. And there were some other things. Like I do want to really illustrate to people how people live a life in sports now, whether you're a league, whether you're a fan, whether you're a star player with some kind of voice and influence. But I needed to explain the concept first. And so in everything that I like to do that has some depth to it, and it goes back to when we did the Black Coaches Project 2 years ago in the Post, and I wrote 3 columns for that. We're so bad at history in the United States. And I think you always need to go back and do some kind of historical excavation and put things in proper perspective. And so I wanted Jackie Robinson. That piece was about the myth of inclusion in sports, and that I think a lot of people think that there was a before and then there was an after, and the after has been all glorious. And why do you even worry about the before? Which reminds you of so many different things, in terms of the way we talk about race in America. The most active battle right now is the transgender sports issue, particularly trans women inclusion in women's sports. And I knew that was a piece that had to be in there. There was a lot of debate with my editors about whether we were going to do that one at that point or not. But I said, this is where the battleground is freshest. Like, everything else is more of a concept. And I wanted to show some transparency and talk about media and media discourse, media versus journalism. I always have this saying, I'm a Kentucky boy. So all bourbon is whiskey, but all whiskey ain't bourbon. And it's the same thing, right? Like, journalism is a part of media, but all media ain't journalism.
Let's take them one at a time, if we could. You frame the Jackie Robinson story in a challenging way. I mean, look, the Jackie Robinson story has obviously been told from every conceivable side hundreds and hundreds of times. You went back to 2021, where a statue of Jackie Robinson that was erected for a little league called League 42, designed to encourage inner city kids to play baseball, was cut off at the knees and destroyed. And This is one of those sort of under the radar news stories that I imagine got a little bit of national attention when it happened, but fades pretty quickly into the background. How did you find a way to sort of integrate that into the larger issue of Robinson, and what he still means in the way that his legacy is interpreted or misinterpreted?
Yeah, I wanted to write a piece about what it means to carry a legacy, and I wanted that piece to have some depth to it. And I remember talking about this. We would have weekly meetings and kind of carving out the concept and, the visuals and all the stuff that goes around that. And I had talked for weeks. I was really interested in figuring out that Wichita part of the story with the statue, but I was also really interested in this book, Thank You, Jackie Robinson, that showed up on that review list. Essentially a book ban in Duval County, Jacksonville, Florida. And
a book that was written in the 1970s.
Right.
And is just a children's book about Jackie Robinson and his inspirational journey.
Yes. And I wanted to talk to the Robinson family and those closest to them. And I wanted to do this sort of multi-layered thing on what it means to carry a legacy. So in a sense, they're all carrying on Jackie's legacy, a league named after him in Wichita, Kansas, which is pretty random, right? Because, there's not a lot other than Kansas City, which is pretty far away from Wichita, that really carries Jackie Robinson. But it was just he was an inspiration. Then you think about this late Jewish author and this book being considered questionable in Florida. And then you think about the Robinson family, and all of them are in their own way carrying on the legacy of someone who's not with us anymore. The author died in 1992. The man who created the statue, John Parsons in Wichita, had a great story. Fell off a tree, hurt his back, couldn't be a firefighter anymore, had to pivot. Wound up coming back to his first love, which was art. And then he figured out how to sculpt late in his life. But he passed away 2 years ago. And obviously Jackie's not been with us for a long, long time. I wanted all of those different people to almost speak as one, for us to understand when we talk about someone's legacy who's not with us anymore and time passes, we have a responsibility in how we speak of people and their impact. And when it's something that is incredibly gutting in some way, Jackie Robinson's, what he went through in life and what he held, you could argue killed him. The man was not in great health, and he passed away at 53 years old. And so there's a little bit of we always talk about what Jackie inspired, but what about what we put on Jackie?
Man, I want to stick on that, but I also wanted opportunity to talk about your other essay about Sadie Schreiner, and I want to read a piece from this, just a line that I think kind of sums it up here. It says, "Over the past few years, there has been no better way to fuel division in sports than to target the few Sadies and characterize them as nefarious gender interlopers." How did you find Sadie, and why did you think that this particular story and interest is the best way to sort of characterize the division, the divisions that people are bringing when they start engaging in sports and trying to mix their politics up with it?
Yeah, it was interesting because I really wanted it to be a non-elite athlete, youth-based, and there were some that I talked to. Some parents wanted to be a little more protective of their child. Some things just didn't quite line up. And then the Sadie story started to really kind of just, I don't want to say dominate because it wasn't top of mind in the national news cycle, but there wound up being more and more things about Sadie that were being said, being discussed. And she had become, during the NCAA season, even though she's non-scholarship Division III, she had become an avatar for the anti-trans rage. And I wanted it to be active, again, because I think that if I had done, a youth athlete and what they were experiencing, but it being under the surface. Like it just wouldn't be acute enough. And I just felt like all the stuff. And then once you talk to Sadie, she's incredibly, incredibly thoughtful and, really sees herself as a runner. Like there's a lot of stuff in there that I didn't wind up getting to write because it wasn't a pure profile of Sadie. But Sadie's favorite athlete is Jesse Owens. She's obsessed with Jesse Owens' story. And I've got some track background in my family, not me because I'm slow as hell. But, my aunt qualified for the 80 Olympics, was a number one hurdler. But we, decide, not to compete in the 80 games. And then 4-way photo finish in 1984. Her name's Stephanie Hightower. Took them 20 minutes to decide who won the Olympic trials. And they determined that she finished fourth. The U.S. goes 1, 2, 3, in 1984 in L.A. And so in another life, she has 2 medals, probably one of them gold. And just talking to Sadie about, our mutual love of track and her opening up about, what it was like as a boys' high school participant who was really good at track, who was going to Rochester Institute of Technology, RIT, with expectations to be good, but then never identifying and never feeling like she was a boy, and decided to make the transition, and then explaining what it means to transition. I thought it was a good way to illustrate the sports part of it and to get beyond the biological male thing that people and how hard these frames are. But, ultimately, and I've gotten a lot of feedback on that story, and people want to talk about the sports aspect of it, which is a really complicated thing. But what I'm saying is the issue should stay in sports. Like, we should not have all of these policies that dominate, half the states that have these really rigid policies against trans participation now. And it's interesting, guys, like in that series, that runs after Jackie Robinson. And, I wrote Jackie while I was writing part 1. I wrote the media story, and then Sadie was the last thing, right? Like it was kind of in that order. So I had finished the Jackie thing and we had gone through the edits, and I'm already in that mindset of what it means to exclude in sports, like what it means to disentangle from exclusion, which once you decide to bar somebody, it takes 50, 60, 70 years in American history. And especially when you're doing it and you're using the political system as your weapon. And I'm a firm believer that most problems in sports need to be handled in sports. And when you get some politician yapping about it, and then you really, really, really have a problem. And that's where we are in that conversation. And I get the understanding, and I don't think I come away with any kind of solutions in that piece on exactly what can happen, other than we need to be more human when we talk about it, and we need to stop going and asking the government for help.
Jerry Brewer is a sports columnist for The Washington Post. You should read all of his work because he is one of the best at what he does in American journalism. We'll post links to his series, Grievance Games, on our show page. Jerry, it's been a pleasure having you come on the show. Thanks so much.
Oh, anytime. Thank you.
And now it is time for Afterballs, sponsored by Bennett's Prune Juice, endorsed by Kenny Sailors, who says it was okay. So in one of our earlier segments, we talked about Jerry West and his legacy as one of the great figures in American basketball history and his role in building 8 NBA champions over 4 decades. With that record, it's easy to think he always got it right as an executive, given that he's arguably the greatest American sports executive that ever lived. Which got me thinking about his very first NBA draft as a general manager for the LA Lakers. He took over as the Lakers GM in 83, but didn't have a pick until 84 when the Lakers had the 23rd overall. That draft, of course, if you're an NBA fan, you know it's considered to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest in NBA history, with 4 Hall of Famers being drafted in the first 16 picks and 5 overall. Those were Akeem Olajuwon, Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, John Stockton in those first 16 picks. But after that, it was kind of a grab bag, man. There was a lot of dudes. And I mean, the draft was much longer in 1984. It went on for a while. So, there was a lot of room to pick a lot of dudes, and maybe things wouldn't go so well. One of the guys coming into that 84 draft was a player named Earl Jones. And Earl Jones played at the District of Columbia University, Stefan.
University of the District of Columbia.
Yeah.
UDC,
they called it,
baby.
It was a D2 school back then. And look, coming into the draft, he was considered a risk, because I think he was 7 feet tall, 210 pounds. He put up some big numbers there, but he had a reputation as an underachiever. In fact, the New York Times called him the mystery man of the draft. There at UDC, he was a 3-time Division II All-American and a 2-time NCAA Division II Player of the Year with a career scoring average of 21.7 points. Jerry West took him at number 23. It didn't go so well. As a rookie, he was limited by injuries. He had fractured his right foot, and he only played in 2 games for a total of 7 minutes and took only 1 shot. Okay. The next year, in October of 85, he was traded to the San Antonio Spurs in exchange for future considerations and was waived a couple weeks later. He had a few other cups of coffee in the league. He signed a couple of 10-day contracts with the Milwaukee Bucks, never caught on. And then he began his world tour. He played a season in Italy, then in France, a club in Spain. I mean, you know, So he did try to make his little living in the NBA, but it just didn't seem quite to work out. This is not something that comes up often in Jerry West's biography. And I don't say that or bring him up to, you know, to defame Jerry West or to, you know, put some sort of doubt into his status as the greatest American sports executive of all time. Just everybody makes mistakes every now and again, right, Stefan? So, you know, I mean, did you? I saw you typing furiously. Did you go look up Earl Jones?
I did not. No.
Okay.
I'm trusting that. I am curious though. UDC is just a few blocks from where I live. It's a very small campus. It is mostly built in the 70s, sort of concrete. Some updates more recently, but it's a really tiny place, mostly commuter students, and it's a funny place to even think about having a basketball player make it to the NBA.
They've got to have a display over there. Maybe the next time I'm in town, you, me, and Josh will go over there. Then we'll go to the Howard, you know, and look for their soccer national championship display. We'll just hit all the small colleges.
Indeed.
So anyway, Stefan, who is your Earl Jones?
Well, it's been a pretty good summer for Greece. Marina Sati turned in a spirited 11th place finish in the Eurovision Song Contest. While I'm on the subject, no shade to winner Nemo from Switzerland, but I was all in for Croatia's Baby Lasagna and his small town to big city banger, Rim Tim Tagi Dim. I'm a big boy now. I'm going away, and I sold my cow. Great line. Giannis is expected to play for Greece in the Last Chance Olympics qualifying tournament in early July, with my cafe-owning friend Yannis Tsikas cheering him on. Greece, fingers crossed, is a favorite. And of course, a few weeks back, Olympiakos became the first Greek football team ever to win a European title, capturing the Europa Conference League. Olympiakos, which will be celebrating its 100th anniversary next year, upset Aston Villa of the English Premier League in the semifinals, and then faced Fiorentina of Italy's Serie A in the final in Athens. The game's only goal came in the 116th minute, a header by a Moroccan striker off of a cross from an Argentine-Polish midfielder to seal the win for a Spanish coach who had taken over the Greek club just 3.5 months earlier. But the win wasn't the biggest in the history of Greek football. That came 20 years ago on July 4th, 2004, when Greece beat Portugal in Lisbon to cap an absurd run to win the European Football Championship, the Euros. The Greeks went off at 150-1 to win the tournament, and honestly, those odds seemed low. In the group stage, Greece beat Portugal, tied Spain, and lost to Russia, and snuck into the knockout rounds on goals scored. Then my defensive-minded compatriots upset France and the Czech Republic by identical scores of 1-0. The final was a rematch against Portugal, which was led by midfielder Luis Figo, who that year was named one of the 100 greatest living footballers, and by a 19-year-old named Cristiano Ronaldo. The game was scoreless into the 57th minute when this happened. The goal came off of the head of striker Angelos Charisteas, who enjoyed a long career in Greece, Germany, and the Netherlands, and elsewhere, and for the Greek national team, which he represented 88 times. After scoring, Charisteas raced around the field, lifted his jersey over his head, revealing a t-shirt with a picture of his young nephew on it. Greece then parked the proverbial bus and hung on for another 1-0 win. Here's the end, this time in English.
It's over. It is over. Greece are the champions of Europe, the ultimate outsiders at the start of the tournament. And even at the start of this final, it's a footballing fairy story.
And it really was. Before 2004, Greece had qualified for exactly one European championship in 1980 and one World Cup finals in 1994 in the U.S. Both of those teams were coached by Alkis Panagoulias, who a few years later led the fledgling U.S. national team before returning to Greece to take over Olympiakos, where I profiled him for the Associated Press when I lived in Athens. Greece didn't win a game or get out of the group stage in either tournament, and in the World Cup it finished dead last, allowing 10 goals and scoring none. Since Greece's unlikely title in 2004, it's been tough sailing for the national team. As defending champion, Greece was the top seed at the 2008 Euros, but it lost all three games in the group stage. It reached the World Cup finals in 2010 in South Africa and was eliminated in the group stage again. It made it back to the World Cup finals in Brazil in 2014, finally got out of the group, and lost heartbreakingly on penalties in the round of 16 to Costa Rica. The 2024 Euros began over the weekend in Germany. Alas, there will be no anniversary fairy story for Greece. That's because the Ethniki Omada lost in a playoff for a final spot to Georgia, again on penalties. Good for Georgia. It's been engulfed by anti-government protests. It's got a guy named Kvicha Kvaratskhelia, who plays for Napoli in Serie A and is nicknamed Kvaradona for his ridiculous dribbling skills. So go Georgia. Georgia opens its first Euros on Tuesday against Greek neighbor Turkey. Another Greek neighbor, Albania, is also in the tournament. Ronaldo is back yet again for a sixth Euros at age 39. But hey, we'll always have 2004. If you want to learn more, The Insane Run is the subject of a recent book, which has been translated into English. It's called The Miracle by Greek journalist Vasilis Sambrakos. And it's also the subject of a terrific documentary, King Otto, directed by Christopher Andre Marx, about the team and its German coach, Otto Rehhagel, who led the Greeks to glory.
Man, you know, it really seems sad when you realize 2004 is 20 years ago.
Yeah. I watched that final. I moved to D.C. the previous year and watched that final in a Greek restaurant sitting at a bar with David Plotz of Slate and the great Frank Foer, the author of How Soccer Explains the World and who now writes for The Atlantic. Good memory. Good tournament.
Yeah, man.
Very exciting for us diaspora Greeks.
Man, I would love to go see one of those someday. Somebody, we have a lot of famous, listeners in here. Every time we get an email from somebody like, man, you're seem pretty impressive. So maybe somebody can just, get us some credentials and let us cover the Euros next go round or something like that.
Let's do it, man. Hey, we got the World Cup coming in 2026. Joel, let's go to a game.
I would love to. That would be fantastic.
That's all for this episode, but we've also got a bonus episode that's live right now where we'll discuss Joel's journey into the heart of the fan rebellion against the Oakland Athletics. To hear it, subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup plus to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now. We'll see you there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the show and to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. For Josh Levin and Joel Anderson, I'm Stefan Fatsis. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thanks for listening.